Good evening.
Good evening.
A couple of things to say to you before. Thank you, Jerry. You're looking very dapper yourself right now. I like the shoes. To consider before we begin. First of all, I'm going to give you a blessing. The blessing comes from a book called the Communica Gallica. Communica Gallica was gathered by a man called Alexander Carmichael, who's an excise worker in the mid-19th century in Scotland. And he went round the communities in the islands in the far north of Scotland, collecting songs and incantations and prayers from this community. And these were dissolving in front of their eyes at the time. And they've got a very beautiful lyrical quality to them. It's almost as if the last remnants of pagan Christianity were still there in those places. And they sort of disappeared as he got them. So I'll give you that blessing first. The story itself I'm going to tell you is called Akanidi, the daughter of the sun, or how happiness came. And that is a Sami story. And the Sami are a people who live up in the far north of Europe. They live in the sort of coldest inhabitable land in the world. They live in a place called the tundra. And their lands stretch from northern Norway through Finland to Siberia. And they have a very vibrant culture and a very generous culture, and they're still getting a hard time as well, as Indigenous people too. And again, Indigenous people all over the world right now are getting a hard time. And I believe there is wisdom in these stories that is passed down from a very wise and old source. And I think that wisdom knows no time. And there's always something in these stories for today. And this story, if you listen to it with the right ears, is utterly contemporary. Okay, so first of all, we've got to change the energy a little bit. We've got to move the energy in this place, so make it ready for what's going to take place. So, I'm going to ask you a favour. I want you to shout out with me. I'm going to say, I put this moment. If you can say here. I put this moment.
Yeah.
I put this moment.
Yeah.
I put this moment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Power of raven, be thine. Power of eagle, be thine. Power of the sun. Storm, be thine. Power of moon, be thine. Power of the sky. Power of sea, be thine. Power of earth, be thine. Power of heaven. Goodness of sea, be thine. Goodness of land, be thine. Goodness of heaven. Each day be gracious to thee. No day be vexed to thee. Honour and compassion. Love of each face be thine. Death on pillow be thine. Thy Saviour's presence. The sun on his boat sled travelled across the tundra. Now, just to make things clear, this is just a representation of the sun, okay? I know it's sort of flat and dish-shaped, and you've got to remember this was when the Earth was young, and people just knew the sun as a disc, okay? We all know the sun's spherical, and we all know we're standing on a planet that's spherical, okay? Just to get the belief and value system out of it. Good. Okay. So, the sun was travelling across the sky. And the sun had many children. He had the twin storm clouds. He had the tempest. And he also had daughters as well. And also he was father to the four winds. He was father to the wind of the south, father to the wind of the north, and father to the wind of the west and the east. And he didn't have a favourite, really, but he dearly loved his youngest daughter, Akanidi. And who could not love Akanidi? Arkanidi's name meant bright sunbeam, and her job was to distribute the sun's heat over the tundra. And she did that with such delight and such joy and such creativity. But more importantly, she did it with absolute fairness. She made sure everything and everyone had the exact same amount of light and heat. And she loved her job, and she loved everything she shone on. But people puzzled her. She looked down at the tents, and sometimes people would come out and look at her and moon their faces and bask in her glory. Sometimes they would scowl and go back inside their tents. But the most puzzling to her was she would see people sitting on sable fur, beautifully dressed, obviously eating too much and telling other people what to do and doing nothing much themselves. And there were people whose backs were bent, who were wearing threadbare clothes, and they were herding the reindeer and working the fields. And they seemed to be doing all the work, but these people seemed to be getting all the spoils. So nothing much changed there. And she looked at this and thought, maybe I can change this. Maybe I can help. Also, something is missing here. There is some colour missing here. There is some joy missing here. Perhaps I can help with this. Maybe. So, she approached her father, Biavi, the sun god. And Biavi can be female as well as male, but for the purposes of this story, he's a male. Because it's about a daughter talking to her father. Dad, I want to go and live with the people. And the son took a huge intake of breath. Why, Akanidi, would you want to live with people? You live in the sky with me. You have your 4 brothers, the winds, to play with. You can dance on the clouds. You can sing to the burning stars. You can talk to the crying moon. Why would you want anything to do with people? People are strange. People are greedy. People take offence at the slightest thing. I think I can help them, Dad. And at that point, the son knew, as any father knows, there's not much point in fighting a daughter when she really wants something. Mm-hmm. So to save a 10-minute fight, he gave in straight away. Very well, Akanidi. When I rise over the tundra tomorrow at dawn, you shall find yourself amongst the people. They go to your bed. And she went to her bed, wherever sunbeams sleep. Who knows? And when she awoke in the morning, she looked at the sky from a very different angle. She found the clouds to be very far away, and they were framed by a round smoke hole in a tent. And when she reached up to touch her friends the clouds, she found she had 2 chubby human hands and 2 chubby human arms. And even more puzzling, at the end of her cot were 2 human faces looking at her with complete astonishment. This was an old couple who had never had a child and who had prayed all their life to be blessed. And now they found a human baby just appearing in their tent. So they were agape. And if they were agape at that, their jaws were on the floor when this happened. Akanidi looked straight at them and said, "Hello, my name is Akanidi. Can I be your daughter?" And the old woman melted. The old man wasn't so sure, but there was a wisdom running through the old lady, and she reassured him. So Akanidi came to stay in the tent with the 2 old people. And she grew way quicker than a human child. And very soon she was toddling around the tent. And very soon she could toddle outside the tent. And she saw she was in a small island in the middle of some water with a large fir tree on it. And she could see villages across the water, but she couldn't get to them. And she realised what her father, the sun, had done. He had done what any father would do. He gave her her wish, but he tried to keep her safe. As soon as she saw this, she went to the old man and woman. I want to go be with the people. I don't want to be here. I want to go and play with them. I want to go and teach them. Akanidi, you are too small. Wait your time. You have not even made your maiden's dress. Once you make your maiden's dress, we will take you to the people, but only then. Now, the maiden's dress is a Sami tradition. When a young girl comes of age, she makes a beautiful dress and is presented to the tribes. So, in that process, Akanidi learnt patience. Every day that went past, the old couple grew to love her more and more and more. She helped the old man fix his nets, as he was a fisherman, and she fixed them with such dexterity. She helped the old woman around the tent keep things spick and span, and they noticed how she did things with such enthusiasm and such joy that their hearts opened more and more every day. Then it came time for Akanidi to start making her maiden's dress. And with the old woman, they went carrying small objects. They gathered little berries and feathers and beautiful twigs and shells. And as the world was young then, sometimes you could find little pieces of gold and little pieces of gems just in the river. And they took them and they started to make the dress. And as Akanidi began to sew her maiden's dress, the old lady saw once more, with the intricacy and the beauty of the patterns, that she was no ordinary child. And once the dress was made, she put it on. Her father placed a crown of juniper berries on her head, and she walked down to the water and looked at her reflection and began to sing. And she sang the most beautiful song the old couple have ever heard. In the Sami language, it is known as a yoik. And as Akanidi sang her yoik, the water seemed to move in sympathy with her voice. The clouds danced to her very voice, and the whole of creation seemed to be in harmony with that voice. And the old couple looked at each other and realised they were in the presence of the divine. And both their hearts broke on the spot, because they knew Akanidi would have to leave them and go into the world, because they would have to share her joy. So the family went to bed, and in the night the south wind came along and blew the island to the mouth of the river. And when the old man and Akanidi woke in the morning, they simply had to step off the island onto the land, and they walked into the birch forest towards a column of blue smoke that was coming from the trees. And when they entered the village, they saw that everyone was in the large tent in the village. And they went in, and the old man introduced himself by pulling back the tent flap. And they saw inside the whole village was sitting round with happy, greasy faces and with juice dripping all over their clothes. Because the north wind, some months earlier, had blown a large iceberg down to the mouth of the river. And as the iceberg melted, there was a whale inside. And the village had never known such food in abundance. They were fed all winter and all summer, and because of the fat they had from the whale, they had light all winter as well. So as Akanidi walked into this abundance, and everyone looked at her, she glowed with a rainbow light, and everyone was entranced. The children came up to her and were looking at her dress, and they wanted to rub noses with her because she was so beautiful. And then the adults came to her and beheld her, and they began to pick her up and pass her around from adult to adult, and it started to get a little bit frustrating. And then some of the men began roughhousing and throwing them there, and at that point Akanidi became scared and frustrated, and she uttered a word. She uttered a word of power, a word her father had taught her, a word that had never been said on earth before. And when she uttered that word, she became translucent, and hands went through her. And she stood on the ground, and the people were afraid. back from her. And in that moment, she began to sing once more. And the song was once more so beautiful that it soothed any fears of the people. And they gathered round her once more. And Akanidi gestured to them, "Follow me." And they followed her out of the tent, down to the shore. And she gathered the children round her, and she got them to gather small objects. They gathered twigs, they gathered berries, they gathered shells, they gathered shiny things. And she asked them to put them as patterns on the ground. And the children hadn't really done anything like this before. Art and craft was not known to them. So they did their best, they made these little patterns and were very self-conscious and they weren't very sure of what they'd done. And they showed them to Akanidi. And Akanidi just looked at the children and smiled. And went down and put her hands over the patterns. And as she put her hands over the patterns the children had made, they were transformed. You could see fish leaping out of the water. You could see reindeer going across the tundra. You could see the storms in the sky. And the children were delighted. And they started to make their own patterns of these as well, and started to make figures. And this is what Akanidi did. She went from tent to tent, village to village, teaching people craft, teaching people song, teaching people how to make beauty. And she gave beauty to the people. But as I mentioned before, there was a certain section of some of the villages who didn't like what Akanidi was doing. They were too well fed. They sat in sable and they could tell the people what to do. And they didn't like the attention she was getting at all whatsoever. But they kept it to themselves. They whispered these things up their sleeves. Because when they asked Akanidi for gifts, when she asked them for the shiny things, she would give them. So we went to the village. Akanidi, we're very glad you're here. Have you any of the gems, the metal? Not the berries, not the sticks, but the gems, the gold. Can you give us the gems and the gold? And Akanidi, being a generous creature, would give the gems and the gold to these people, because that's what they asked for. As they say in Scotland, these people mistook softness for daftness. They thought Akanidi was stupid and they could take advantage of her. But Akanidi eventually saw these people began to trade these objects. They began to buy property. They began to buy alcohol. They even began to buy daughters for wives. And Akanidi saw this was not making people happy. So at that, she refused. They came to her for gems. No more gems. You can have anything from me. No more metal, no more gems. This made the people furious. How dare she refuse us? Who does she think she is? And they began to become vocal about Akanidi. Who is this Akanidi? Where does she come from? She came here on a small boat. She brings songs we do not know. She brings crafts we do not know. She takes more than she gives. In the birch forest, there was a place called Black Varaka. And in Black Varaka lived the Swamp Witch. And the Swamp Witch held sway over the people with her dark songs, and they gave her tribute. But when Akanidi came, they stopped. So for that, the Swamp Witch hated Akanidi. But she hated Akanidi even more because at one point in time she was a daughter of the sun. But that's another story. So, the people from the village, the elders, went to Black Varaka and they brought a whole reindeer. Fur, hoofs, antlers, meat. And they took this reindeer and they threw it into the swamp. And as it gurgled down, something gurgled up, and the Swamp Witch came through. What would you want of me? And they asked, how do we kill Akanidi? Akanidi is a daughter of the sun. She cannot be killed when the sun's eye is upon her. Go to my river, find a moss green stone. Take that stone, big enough to crush a young girl's chest. Take it to the tent where you find Akanidi. Close the smoke hole. Remember, close the smoke hole. Strike Akanidi with the stone, she will die. So the elders went to the river, and fairly quickly they found the moss green stone. And they walked to Akanidi's village. And they came to Akanidi's tent, and in there, Akanidi was as usual, surrounded by a circle of children, and she was teaching them how to make shell buttons. Now the elder that had the stone panicked and rushed into the tent and threw the stone straight at Akanidi, hitting her square in the chest with a sickening blow. And as soon as it hit Akanidi, she moved into the other world and back again. She moved in and became as smoke and back again. She moved in and became a sunbeam and back again. But they had forgotten to close the smoke hole. So she began to rise. And as she rose, with her dying breath, she uttered her last yoik, her last song. And with such sublime beauty, it began to move the walls of the tent as a heartbeat. And this heartbeat was transmitted across the tundra, and it began to melt the snow, and it melted the heart of all who heard it. It even melted the heart of the black-hearted people who had killed Akanidi. And they stood with tears running down their face, saying, "What have we done?" And as Akanidi rose, some of the children around her were translated too. It began to rise with her. And if you asked them, when they were old people, what was the most beautiful moment of their life, they would say the moment they almost rose to heaven with Akanidi. Now as Akanidi moved through the smoke hole, her father came down and scooped her up and brought her back to the sky. And she never descended to the earth again. And when she reached the heaven, she opened her eyes and realized who she was. Hopefully one day we will all do that. And as she looked down upon the earth, she saw people singing. She saw people making patterns with their needles. She saw children making pictures and shapes. And she called her father, "Father, Biavi, come and see what Akanidi has done." And the son looked down on the earth, and he was a proud dad.